9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to DSR. I'm David Rothkopf, your host, and I'm joined by our usual gang of insightful characters, including Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law Center. How are you doing, Rosa?
Very well, David.
Kori Schake of the American Enterprise Institute. How are you, Kori?
I am exceedingly well, David.
Excellent. And dressed exactly like Kori Schake, as per usual, Ed Luce of the Financial Times. You look splendid today, Ed.
Thank you. I've been stalking Kori to Patagonia. She wasn't aware of it until now.
I know Rosa feels very left out that she's not dressed exactly the same way.
It's true. The two of your listeners can't see this, but Kori and Ed are both wearing these cool, high-tech looking down vest sort of things, and they look ready for their Antarctic expedition.
Yes, whereas Kori pointed out, anything but a SpaceX expedition, given Ed's recent writings about Elon Musk. I wouldn't travel on SpaceX with Ed.
Well, I might land. Musk says he wants to die on Mars, but not on impact. And I don't know. You can spin that a lot of different ways.
I personally thought the two of you were dressed up because you were going to volunteer to join the expedition to invade Greenland and annex it for the United States, and that's the explanation for your cold weather gear.
Oh my God, I'm already exhausted of Trump administration craziness.
I personally was going to volunteer for the Panama Canal retaking because it's warmer there.
Well, that sounds like good thinking there, Rosa. You know, we've been doing this all together for a long, long time, and I thought we'd kind of seen everything, you know, and now we've got kind of news of the weird. You know, yesterday Trump did a press conference, and there's a lot to discuss from the press conference, but let's start where Rosa started it. We seem to be entering a new era of American colonial expansion, in which we are going to, grab Panama, Canada, Greenland, and we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. How you feeling about that, Kori?
So I think one of the real challenges of 4 years of a Trump presidency is not overreacting to things he does not have the power to do just because he says them. And I actually think the serious point about the craziness about the conquest of Panama, Canada, and Greenland from a guy who didn't think we should be fighting in the Middle East or in South Asia and doesn't appear to have the stomach for seeing stuff through. I think one of the real challenges is this is going to put an enormous amount of pressure on Congress to enact their constitutional authorities. You know, if you think Congress is going to give the president an authorization for the use of military force to invade any of those three places, I'd be extremely skeptical of him getting authorization. I could see Rosa smiling because she thinks I'm a sweet summer child to believe he would think he needed it. And so, I mean, from my work, I feel like the game is going to be on Capitol Hill and getting Congress to, because it looks like on the Matt Gaetz appointment, it looks to me like Trump does actually listen when elected members of Congress or rich people tell him something's a bad idea. And I think we're going to have to do so much of that in the next 4 years. And so that, to summarize, the dual challenge is not overreacting to what he doesn't have the power to do, while strengthening the civic and legislative bases of the state.
You know, that's a summary of every Substack I've written for the past 2 months, and you did it much better than I did. So, well done. But Rosa, is Kori correct? Do you think she's a sweet summer child?
I do. She's always been a sweet summer child, and that's why she's our resident optimist. I mean, on the one hand, I think Kori is almost certainly right that this is just Trumpian nonsense and bluster, and that he has no particular intention of seriously attempting to do anything, much less involving military force with Greenland, Canada, or Panama. On the other hand, you never can tell with Donald Trump. And is it at a minimum designed to soften up negotiating positions of various allies? Yeah, I'm sure it is. Will it have that effect? It probably will. They're all terrified now because nobody knows whether to take him seriously. But on the third hand, because I have three hands, I don't know if you all knew that. On the third hand, I think any faith Kori has in Congress actually stepping up to its constitutional responsibilities is misplaced with regard to Congress. I mean, thus we have seen thus far, with the occasional rare and small and temporary exception, that they're just terrified of Donald Trump, and basically, I think he can get enough people to go along with whatever insane thing he wants. So number one, I don't actually think Congress is going to be a serious check on anything he wants to do. And number two, presidents have, he will claim what other presidents from both political parties have claimed before him, which is, notwithstanding the War Powers Act, inherent presidential constitutional authority to use military force if he deems it necessary, and he will play the kinds of games, or the lawyers he has working for him will play the kinds of games that I'm sorry to say lawyers for Barack Obama, among others, have played in the past, of saying, well, that wasn't really military force as understood under the terms of the War Powers Act because it was just airplanes, or there weren't that many boots on the ground, or they were on the ground, but they weren't wearing boots, they were wearing flip-flops, or whatever it might be, in order to say we don't even need to make the requisite notifications under the War Powers Act, much less need to withdraw and cease U.S. military action within the required period. Even so, the War Powers Act gives a president, 60 days plus a 30-day withdrawal period, even if Congress does not pass the requisite authorizations to use that military force. So I don't actually think there are any effective checks. Frankly, there were no effective checks for Bush. There were no effective checks for Obama. Why would suddenly we have effective checks for Donald Trump, who's shown his ability to blackmail everybody in sight? But as I said, the only thing that gives me some comfort is that I don't, in fact, think that Trump is particularly likely to do anything real to follow through on this.
Ed, I'd like to come to you next for your comment, but I have to turn back to Kori here because I just looked up the northernmost latitude of Greenland, and it's about 8340. And Kori, that really does give us an opportunity to dust off an old slogan, does it? We could go 8340 or fight, right?
Exactly right.
Ed, you don't even know what we're talking about, do you?
Yeah, I don't have a
clue. 40 or fight
was pushing back Britain's attempt to steal territory from the United States just because we had joint sovereignty over it in what was called the Oregon Territory. David, thank you so much for a chance to bring the 1840s back.
Yes, well, and also just the chance to reintroduce Ed to the perennial conflict between the United States and the UK. But now, having said all of that, Ed, what do you think of this new period of colonial expansionism? And you leave the UK, you come to the US, and all of a sudden we're having a birth of empire like the old days.
Yeah, I mean, Kori, of course, has written wonderfully about the origins of the Monroe Doctrine, which was prodded by Britain. It was about keeping European meddling out of the hemisphere, but chiefly non-British European meddling, because the idea was America will become Britain's protege or partner. So we're back 202 years later. I think I'm right in saying it was 1823, right, Kori, that the Monroe Doctrine was proclaimed. We're back 202 years later. with a new version of this, with a bit of President McKinley thrown in. The president, of course, who grabbed.
I'm going to say, I've never seen Kori so happy. I think she's going to dust off her battleship hat and put that on.
And I'm telling you, we're on the same Arctic/galactic expedition. There are different legs to this upcoming adventure that Kori and I are kitted out for. But first time is tragedy, second time is farce. I mean, I do sort of lean more towards the farcical.
The first time is tragedy, the second time is farce, and the third time is Trump foreign policy.
And the third time is Trump foreign policy. I mean, it's I think this is more farcical than anything else. Although I do note that I saw a clip earlier today of a Republican congressman from Texas, a guy called Brandon Gill, saying that Greenlanders, Panamanians, and Canadians should be grateful for being welcomed into the American fold. So you've got these kinds of idiots, echoing and amplifying Trump's McKinley-esque, Teddy Roosevelt-esque instincts. And you cannot ever completely write off Trump meaning what he says. I suspect what he'll do is he'll get some concessions on shipping rates for American ships in the canal. There'll be some concessionary fossil fuel exploration rights in the Greenland area that can leverage climate change and the emergence of new energy fields. And the Canadians, they're used to this. I mean, this has been a long-running joke.
They enjoy it very much. I think that the Canadians think it's very funny.
Yeah.
I think we burned the White House the last time we fought Canada. Do you think, David, anybody in Trump world has realized how many Democratic members of Congress any one of those three acquisitions would produce?
No, I don't think they've thought that through. It'd be very good for the Democrats. And to add on a whole country like Canada that depends on national health insurance would really change the debate in the United States. But two things. One, Donald Trump's son went to Greenland yesterday, kitted out more or less like you guys, to show the flag. Went there with Charlie Kirk, that noted foreign policy genius.
Which son was it? Was it Uday or Couche?
Yeah, exactly. Certainly emulates the idiocy of those two. But of course, the issue isn't Canada in this particular case with Greenland. It's Denmark, which has actually owned Greenland for 700 years.
We don't say owned. That's not polite.
Yeah, no, it's had sovereign authority over Greenland for 700 years. Trump yesterday said, well, their legal claims are dubious. 700 years. But Denmark's in NATO. And then I thought, well, maybe this is four-dimensional chess. Maybe what Trump is doing is saying, maybe what he's doing is he's getting NATO to spend more by creating a threat from within NATO. That this is a new, with NATO on NATO violence could get them to spend more money on defense spending. This can't be good for NATO, can it, Kori?
No, it's terrible. And I actually feel bad laughing about it because Trump's recklessness and disregard for, countries that have fought alongside us. Denmark had, 145 or so soldiers killed fighting alongside us in Afghanistan. Canada had 40-some. I mean, these are countries that plant their flags and run risks in affection and support of America. And to treat them this way, even if you're just trying to amuse yourself, as I think is probably the explanation for Trump's behavior, is a terrible thing to do to countries who are our closest friends, and second, dramatically underestimates just how much damage it does to American power in the world to have countries that have had the luxury of taking for granted a United States of dignity and principle to become this.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. Rosa, it also seems to reflect Trump's continued lack of there are few things that he doesn't understand about foreign policy. And I say this with all deference to the office he's about to occupy again. One of them is tariffs. We could talk about those at another time. But one of them seems to be alliances. And he says we have a strong national security interest in Greenland without noting that Greenland is part of Denmark and therefore NATO. We actually have bases in Greenland. Our national security interests in Greenland are pretty much covered, aren't they, Rosa?
One would have thought so, David. And I don't even know what to say to this, but I mean, obviously, to Kori's comment that this is a pretty shabby way to treat allies whose citizens have fought and died as part of U.S.-initiated military operations. We already know what Trump thinks of military service members who fight and die. That's just, their mistake. So look, I don't know what more there is to say about this except that
I've got the solution. We
you
need
do.
to draft Trump's sons to lead the expeditions to Greenland.
I thought that's what Eric was doing in Greenland. I thought he was already invading, but I guess it didn't take. We have to send him back.
Well, I don't know. Trump's drawing on a great tradition. Rosa is in Charlottesville, a town which has itself sort of grown up to be a monument to our third president, Thomas Jefferson, who oversaw what was considered to be a great triumph for the United States back in the day, the Louisiana Purchase.
Not to speak of the war against the Barbary pirates.
Yeah, well, not to speak of that, but the Louisiana Purchase really is, sort of, a great example of U.S. expansionism in that we paid the French something like $17 million for something they didn't actually own, which is fantastic, right? I mean,
So actually, this suggests a genius move by Greenland. Greenland could simply offer Trump a bill of sale, and it could say almost anything, frankly, because it's not, as far as we know, he doesn't read materials that are presented to him. So it could say anything, and they could just charge him a huge amount of money and say, it's all yours, and, here's the special gold-plated toilet that we have reserved for your use when you visit as our new sovereign, and then that would be it. Everybody would be happy. They'd be richer.
It's an excellent idea. Let me change the subject as we're going through news of the weird here to the subject of Ed's most recent column in the Financial Times, which is excellent. I strongly recommend it to everybody because something else kind of weird has been going on. Elon Musk, who Ed describes as the co-president, perhaps that's a slight overstatement, but certainly is the most senior advisor that there is apparently to the incoming president of the United States, seems to be interested also in changing our relationship within NATO, in that he is trying to, he's meddling in the political affairs of both the UK and Germany, and doing so in a kind of blunt and gross way. And you would think that reflects on Trump, but so far it hasn't. And I was just wondering, maybe, Ed, you could recapitulate some of your core points from your column.
Well, thank you for mentioning it kindly. We are living in a dystopian novel. We're actually living in one. I like to read them myself, and have to pinch myself that to remind me this is reality, that we are actually going through a situation where the richest man in the world, who is kind of got the combined features of a Bond baddie, a sort of Blofeld Spectre, kind of blended evil, Dr. Evil sort of character, is
Although there were no Bond baddies that were somehow drug addicts and yet senior advisor. I love the fact that he's a ketamine user all the time and he thinks it has no effect on him just doesn't get mentioned among all of his other defects.
Yeah, I mean, he shows every sign of it. I mean, we just did a little, as in the Financial Times, breakdown of his recent tweeting on Britain and which ex-influencers, which extreme right-wing ex-influencers appear to be shaping his thinking that Britain is one large Sharia-governed sort of rape factory of children, and that Keir Starmer is the chief rapist. I'm not exaggerating here. This is the kind of stuff he's coming out with at about the rate of one every 7 minutes. That it's pretty hard. That is a mental health disorder. I mean, that's pretty hard to explain without, the use of a lot of drugs, a cocktail of drugs. The guy also clearly has sort of godlike delusions. That when he looks in the mirror, I think he sees the most powerful man in the world and somebody whose word should never be questioned. What he's actually doing is channeling the most extreme voices in Britain, who are generally hated by the majority, and as a result is making himself hated. He's now extremely, extremely disliked in Britain, even by people on the quite hard right. So it's a very odd thing that he's doing. The real question, and the reason why I wrote this column, is to what extent is he speaking for Trump here? Because if in any serious way he is speaking for Trump, then we have a journey without any maps, without any real precedent, where the United States is attempting to overthrow the governments of two of its largest allies, and replace those governments with extreme right-wing alternatives, the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany and the Reform Party, Nigel Farage's vehicle in Britain. There's no precedent for this. So the key question is, is he channeling Trump, or is Trump sort of doing good cop, bad cop here, or is Musk just so sort of in his own cloud of ketamine and whatever else he takes that he's lost all hold on reality? And I don't know, but I think the answer to that question is a really important one. And I know that people in London, Berlin, elsewhere, Paris, the French will be next, find it to be a very urgent, a very pressing question.
Kori, I was always under the impression that if a senior advisor to the president says something, then that is perceived to have, consequences, internationally as foreign policy consequences. And somehow Trump seems to be saying, Musk can go off and freelance, or does he? Is the world right to say, oh no, this is all done with Trump's blessing?
I agree with Ed, both that it's incredibly damaging behavior, even if he's not speaking for Trump, that Trump is permitting someone who is a close advisor to behave in this way is incredibly destructive. I also agree with Ed that European friendly governments are trying desperately to figure out what all this means. My sense is that we should ignore Elon Musk and we should ignore the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, because they only have the power that we are going to give them in this. And I feel like the Musk crazy train is sucking us all into constantly playing by their rules. And that feels like, it's going to be a problem with Musk. It's going to be a problem with Trump. And he doesn't even have a formal responsibility. Is the Department of Government Efficiency going to be able to hold meetings that don't respond to the congressional mandates for transparency and the Federal Register, for holding hearings, those kinds of things. I mean, we're ceding so much ground to craziness, and I think we need to use the tools available, including not paying attention to stuff.
Well, I think that's one of our secret powers. And as I said earlier, I think that's good advice. We have more good advice for you if you're a member, because we're going to continue on with the members only section. If you're not a member and you want to get the rest of the good advice, then you should become a member. But for now, if you're not a member, thanks very much for joining us, and bye-bye. And if you are a member, stand by for more.